Hello and welcome to episode 3 of my mostly stock career mode. Now last time we went and did a flyby by the moon and got 360 science, and we're going to spend that right now on some new stuff. Now the first thing I want is of course fuel systems, because I talked about this in the previous 2 episodes that I really like these larger fuel tanks, and the fuel lines help as well. So we're going to grab that without hesitation. Now, because we also plan to be doing landings on the moon pretty soon, we probably want to grab landing, but I'm unsure if that's actually going to be what we go for just yet. We could go with solar panels, could go with another science experiment, which is the pressure data, which wouldn't be a bad choice. Although what I think I want to do, so I'm just looking through these, trying to determine which would be best. And I honestly think I want heavy rocketry because that makes launches much easier. I also want the struts from general construction. And now that we've unlocked a couple other nodes, now I have to pick between a couple more. There's no point in really getting the small docking port just yet. I do want the science experiment, I've decided. And I guess we can get this last 45 cost one for these smaller winglets and some SAS, or some reaction wheels I should say, basically better control. And that'll be all of our science spent on... The biggest thing I'd have to say we got is the larger fuel tanks and larger engines. Now what are we going to be doing this episode? Well, I don't know, we don't have any contracts, so I guess let's go start there and see what we have for contracts that we can be doing. Let's see, we can rescue a Kerbal, which isn't actually bad. When you rescue Kerbals, you actually will get the Kerbal, into your squad, basically, into your program, I guess. And it's not a bad idea, because if you look at the price on these guys, the next Kerbal that we can actually hire costs 65,500. That's almost as much as the first upgrade on some of the buildings that we have. Like if you remember the tracking station and the mission control, they both cost 75,000 to upgrade. The Kerbal, just to hire one, costs 65,000, so it's almost equivalent. Which means it's not a bad idea to actually go and save these guys. So this is an interesting contract that I've never actually seen before. Rendezvous vessels in orbit of Kerbal. Have 2 different vessels in orbit of Kerbal within visual range of each other and kill their relative velocity to achieve this goal. I wonder, can I do this one while rescuing Kerbal? It's actually a really good question. How about we try that? Let's grab the Rendezvous. Let's actually grab both rescues. Wait, what did I just grab? That wasn't a rescue. There are 3 rescues? That's crazy. How do Kerbals do this to themselves? Okay, let's grab all 3 rescues and see what we can do with that. We'll get 3 new Kerbals for our crew. Science data from around the moon. We're not going to be going to the moon just yet. It's not a bad one to take. We'll grab that, but we're not actually going to worry about doing it for now. And I'm also going to grab this perform the visual surveys because I want to do this one for a plane. But I'd say that the first thing we're going to be doing is rescuing a couple of Kerbals from orbit around Kerbal. Now, what are their orbits? Okay, I was expecting rather crazy orbits, but apparently they're all going to be in a nice, smooth equatorial orbit. Okay, this is going to be rather easy. We might be able to do this all in one go, actually. If we time it right, if we do this forward one, and then we increased our orbit size, meaning we move slower and let the other ones catch up, then we should be able to rendezvous with one and basically be close enough to rendezvous with the other immediately. So this should actually be a pretty easy 3-man save mission. So let's go into the VAB and start working on what we're going to build for this. Alright, so we have our rescue craft. Now the main thing about this is we're going to be using this hitchhiker's storage container, because it basically allows us to seat 4 kerbals. Now we're only going to be rescuing 3, but it still lets us seat 4. Now it doesn't actually have the same command module as the command pod, which means we still need a command pod, which we're probably going to have Valentina fly here. And then of course we're going to rescue the 3 kerbals, and we don't need to take anyone else with us. We probably won't need to, although if we want, we can probably take Bill. I want to say it's Bill, because he is the engineer. Yes, we will take Bill, get him some experience. We want to, you know, just level up all our hero kerbals by, of course, getting them all experience, plus it'll give us access to the engineer part, basically, so we can get some flight statistics. Now this craft is almost completely done. I just need to add these nice tail fins, and of course this is where the really nice 2.5 meter tank is going to come in, because it's going to be the main drive for our stage. Now one thing you're going to notice is I'm going to just mention real fast asparagus staging. Now what asparagus staging is basically it's when you have liquid fuel tanks with engines on them outside of the main drive. So you can see right here, these 2 liquid fuels and then the engine below it are on the outside, and what this is doing is it's feeding any liquid fuel that comes into it back into the main stage. So what happens is when I stage these 4 tanks off the sides, this main stage is still completely full of liquid fuel. And for a short time we have the thrust of all of these, and then we just have the thrust of the main one when we're higher up. This is an incredibly efficient method of doing things, because this middle stage remains full, whereas if you didn't have this external fuel duct, then the middle stage would be partially empty by the time you ditched these outside stages, which basically, if the middle stage can sustain itself through flight, it's more efficient to have it this way. Now what struts do is they basically create a second connection node for parts. So if you look, you can see the 2 green connection nodes. You probably know this, how they glue themselves together, and you place your part down. Well, that green connection node is where all the forces get pushed through. With struts, it basically stabilizes that connection node. So with these struts connecting to this fuel tank, these 2 parts are now locked into their positions with the force of this strut, which its force is 150. Which means that these are much more stable. Basically, if you have a part wobbling and it shouldn't be wobbling, strut it and everything will work out. Usually it will stop wobbling unless it's severely massive and it breaks the strut, in which case, well, like crashes will break struts, so you do have to be careful of that. So now we're good to go. SAS on with Valentina here. We got Bill, which means we do have Flight Engineer, which, although I won't necessarily need it, it'll still be helpful just, you know, getting to orbit without having to constantly check my map, because I can read my apoapsis height and my time to apoapsis, well, beforehand. Now at this point, some of you may be thinking, well, why didn't you wait to launch and rendezvous with the targets that you're aiming for? And that's because I want to keep this simple. I don't want to overcomplicate by doing that in one go. I want to keep it simple as we know how to get to orbit, so we're going to aim for getting into orbit again. And then once we get into orbit, then we're going to worry about the rendezvous. That way we don't try and do everything all together. We just try and keep it to what we know and then move to what we don't know. Now, just as a helpful tip, it will be much easier if you launch with the targeted vessel behind your orbit. So kind of 90 degrees around the planet, about behind the orbit that you're launching from, because then, as you can see, our target is indeed behind us, which means we can just easily go to a higher orbit, which is moving slower than lower orbits, and that will allow us to catch up to it, or allow it time to catch up to us, in which case we can burn to rendezvous into it. So as you can see, we're just completing our orbit right now, just waiting until apoapsis to finish our final burn, in which this stage almost perfectly got us in, just about 100 delta V off. Doesn't need to be perfect, but we're in a successful orbit. Now what this means is let's add a maneuver. And let's decrease this maneuver node. Let's reduce our velocity to the point where we're on almost the same orbit as our target. So if you see here on the back, the periapsis after this maneuver node is on the same orbit as the target, and we get these markers again. Now we can click the center of this maneuver node and we can drag it around. And if you look, as I'm dragging it this way, those two markers get closer and closer. Now they reset because that's where the orbit switches. But if we put it directly behind us, as you can see, then you'll notice they're only about 103 kilometers apart. And if we put it closer, now they're 101 kilometers apart. So let's do a little bit of time acceleration. And again, drag this maneuver node even more. We can close that. And you'll see now they're even closer. So we'll, continue along this orbit even more and keep doing the same thing. Drag this node to the point where now they're 36 kilometers. And I'm pretty sure you can figure out that we're just going to keep doing this until they're on top of each other. Now they're 5.7 kilometers apart. Let's see, can we make that any less? 5.2, 4.7, 5.6. So right about here, 4.7 is the minimum we can do this. Now, the reason this works is because, look at it this way. Our target, which is Lenry's heap, is in a lower orbit than us, meaning it moves faster than us. And because it moves faster, it's going to orbit Kerbal more rapidly than we do. Now, because it orbits Kerbal more rapidly than we do, what this means is it will catch up to us. Because we're ahead of it in the orbit, it's behind us, and because it's moving faster, it will catch up to us eventually. So, because we're in a higher orbit, if we go around and we wait a little while, then it will eventually catch up to us. Meaning that eventually we will be able to burn, and this node specifically, we will be able to burn to the point where we are able to align our orbits. So if you look now, you'll see this is the next pass around. It's changed a little bit, but these purple ones are the orbit, the intersection number 2, and this is the first intersection. So if we go over here, you'll see first we intersect there. If we do this node this time around, and then we will intersect even closer. Now, in truth, it doesn't matter which one we burn, or which one we aim for, but because this maneuver node burn will cause both of them to happen, it's just we'll intersect at the intersection 1 first, and then as we move further along the orbit, we'll reach intersection number 2. Simply because the orbits aren't aligned, we'll intersect it twice with our orbit that's higher up than the orbit of our target. So I'm just manipulating the maneuver node as to make it so the first intersection is more favorable. That way we can just intersect once instead of kind of fly by an intersection. Intersection number 1's 10 kilometers. Let's see if we can't bring that down. 3.4 kilometers now, if we burn this node. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. Because of course we aligned our periapsis with the target, and then we just kind of played with the node, both radial in, radial out, and increasing and decreasing our speed until we were able to move these close enough to the point they're touching. And now that they're close, what we're going to do is we're still moving slower, which means it still has time to catch up to us, and we're going to decrease our speed. So we're going to match its orbit, meaning that we will be going at the same speed, roughly, give or take a few meters per second. Of course, because my orbit extends out here, I will be going faster than it, which means I'll just have to slow down and match its orbit. So we have our encounter. Our burn is here in a couple of seconds. So we're just going to wait for that and complete the burn, and then we will intersect with our target. So as you can see, we are slowly converging on it, and we will keep moving towards it ever so slowly. Now, the nav ball, you can change your focus to many different things. You can see your surface speed, your target speed, and your orbital speed. For the rendezvous, we want this set on target. Actually, I think I just deselected my target by mistake. Let's set that as our target. There we go. Now our focus shifted to Kerbal, which was a little bit of a mistake, but it won't affect us too much. I accidentally double-clicked on the planet. And you'll notice that these two craft are getting closer and closer to each other. So I wonder, am I able to do that other one? I don't think they're considered. Now, one of the contracts was to get two vessels within basically vision of each other, but I think they're still a little too far away. So we will wait until we're at the intersection. Now, once you have got your intersection, just wait until it happens. There's nothing else you need to do. There we go. We're pretty close, 3.3 kilometers away. And now what we're going to do is we are going to make sure our nav ball is in target mode. And we're going to point retrograde. Now what this means is this is retrograde to our velocity, relative velocity to the target. So if you notice how it's still moving, if we start to burn, our target relative velocity is decreasing. What this also means is if we follow this node until our relative velocity to our target is practically zero, it's 3.3 kilometers away. If we go back to the map, our orbits are practically aligned. Now it's not perfect yet, but they're pretty close. And it's no longer drifting away from us. So now what we can do is we can find the target. If we spin around the nav ball a little bit. Now this pink circle, if you look here, is the target's position. And if we point at it, now that our relative velocity is very minor, and we use our engine, you'll notice our prograde vector moves towards it, and we can pull the prograde vector until it's right on top of the target. What this means is now we are moving toward the target. So we'll boost this to 20 meters per second. So we're moving at 20 meters per second to the target. So let's do a little time acceleration until we move closer. And you will notice over time this will drift away. So all you really have to do is just go outside and pull your velocity back towards the target so that you're constantly moving toward the target. And then once you've gotten into a pretty close distance, such as we are now, about 500 meters, turn around, still in target mode, and point retrograde. Now that you're pointing retrograde, you just wait until you're close enough, basically. So you can see now it's becoming much more emphasized on how we are really in different speed as our target. So now we'll point retrograde, burn, yet again. Make sure to use very low throttle in order to make it so our target velocity is very minimal. And there we go. We are now just about moving the exact same speed as Leary's heap. So we can use the brackets to switch to a rocket that I don't think should have been possible to get up here. It doesn't have anything attached to it. And we can EVA, hit the space bar. There's our rocket that we just brought up. It's okay, there it is. And the sun just set. And now we just fly our Kerbal over here. Now, we don't need RCS to do this. We just need to know how we're actually controlling our velocity. And once we get close, we'll just grab onto it and board. There we go. We saved one of the Kerbals that we need to save. I wonder, did we complete this? So we got Leary Kerbin to the program. We also completed Save Her, as well as we actually did get the Rendezvous one, so that's pretty cool. We got the Rendezvous vessels. Which means Leary's Heap is now done. And we just have two more to save. So let's take the first one. Ludeni is the next Kerbal that we have to save. So what we're going to do is we're going to time accelerate. Actually, let's make this easier on ourselves. Let's go to the Space Center. And the reason I'm going to the Space Center is click on the tracking station and find Leary's Heap, which is now abandoned. Which means now Leary's Heap, we can just make sure we're selected on it and say terminate. Because we don't need it, it's just pretty much space trash. Now, terminating the vessel, you know, might be cheating because we basically just delete it from the game. But it's in the way of our other orbits, so we'd rather keep this simple than complicated. So I didn't actually mean to go back. We want to go back in there and start flying our vessel again. So there we go. We're back on our vessel, and now what we have to do is, because we're in basically the same orbit as our target, which is Ludeni's Heap, Ludeni's pod, what we need to do is point prograde and fire. What this is going to do is raise our apoapsis. We're going to put it to about 120. And then we're going to time accelerate. Now this is going to put us back into the same situation we were in before, where we're going to be in a higher orbit, meaning we move slower. If you watch, our velocity is decreasing. Our orbital velocity goes down the higher up we go, which means they are going to catch up to us. And once they catch up to us, we will be able to do the exact same thing we did previously. Now, we could wait around, of course, do a couple orbits for them to catch up, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to double the effects of this, and while I'm at my apoapsis, I'm going to burn prograde again to raise my periapsis until they're both, about 120. So at this point we have completely reset exactly what we did last time. So we're just going to mimic the method where we time accelerate and drag this maneuver node that drops our periapsis down to our target's orbital height, and we're just going to drag it along behind us as to watch the encounters close, as of course we catch up because they move faster than us in a lower orbit. And once we have our encounter, we just wait the full orbit out, as you can see, and then burn the node. The exact same method as last time. And now, because we're pushing our periapsis down to the same orbit as the target, we will encounter the target, and then once we manage to get to the encounter, all we have to do is cancel out our relative velocity by burning retrograde with the nav ball in target mode, just like we did the first time. This time, of course, I'm accelerating it through it faster, which of course makes it so we lock our position in orbit with the target, and then we just burn towards the target to close the gap. And as you can see, I'm just burning toward the target a little bit to keep my prograde vector moving towards the target as to get us the closest possible encounter, and then cancel the last bit of relative velocity, and I'll grab Ludemy out of his pod, and of course bring him into the station. And all we have left to do is the last and final rendezvous, which I'm actually using a much less efficient method for this one, although it's faster. So what I'm basically doing on this one is I'm burning away from the planet. Because when you burn away from the planet, what happens is you force your apoapsis to increase as you go forward. So as you can see, my apoapsis is increasing very rapidly. It's less efficient than increasing your apoapsis on the opposite side of the planet, but it is able to get you a faster encounter without having to wait a couple of orbits to get the encounter. You can do it all in one go. So if you see, by burning away from the planet and then burning forward some, I'm actually able to create a node that gets me an encounter with my last target without having to go through several orbits with the node following me as to get the same type of encounter. Now this encounter is less efficient, but I'm going to talk about and show you in just a second how to actually fix this. If your nodes are like 10 to 15 kilometers away, you can make them much smaller. Now of course, during this encounter you can also look at your prograde vector, and you can look at the target vector, and you can manipulate them as to try and reduce the distance between the two. So if you look right here, I'm actually burning on the opposite side of the target compared to my prograde as to make this intersection smaller. And now we're going to intersect at 1 kilometer, and we're already moving towards the target, which means all I have to do now is point retrograde. So now with our 1 kilometer separation, we just employ the exact same tactic we've been employing this entire time for the past 2 rendezvous. We point retrograde with the navball in target mode, wait until we're close, point at the target and pull our velocity vector moving towards it so we move directly toward the target, and then once we're at the desired distance, we cancel out our velocity to kind of lock our position with it. So rendezvous hopefully should be easy by this point, and of course we bring Megbella out and bring her into the hitchhiker's pod. Now you might be noticing at this point there are no heat shields on this craft, and that's because we don't need any heat shields. Well, first off, I don't have the 2.5 meter heat shield, and second, we aren't going to need a heat shield because of 2 major things. The first being the engine and fuel tank we have still has 1300 meters per second of delta V, meaning we can reduce our orbital velocity to 1000 before we even touch the atmosphere. And the second thing being engines have a very high thermal tolerance, meaning they can take a lot of punishment in the atmosphere before they overheat and burn up. So we have plenty of safety margins that we don't actually need a heat shield. Kind of like what I've been talking about in the past episode about heat shields. Now, one thing to note is if you're getting these bars, hit F10. And the reason I say that is the bars, although they're helpful, they do have a really bad memory leak. Meaning, if you see the bars and you're using them for too long, every moment that you actually see them there, the game is leaking memory, meaning eventually it will lead it to crash. So if you see them show up, just hit F10 and that disables them. If you do need to see them again, just hit F10 for a short time, then disable it again, because the longer they're active, the more memory they leak and the more problems that they actually will cause. So we're just going to continue falling down, deploy the top parachute to try and gauge how slowly we're going to fall with the parachutes we have, since we are indeed bringing quite a bit of mass of a rocket back with us. Now, just from the first parachute deploying like that, I can gauge we are going to safely land with our 4 other smaller parachutes, and, of course, nice view of the mountains in the background, and then we're just going to fall back to the ground. How nice of the parachutes to help us topple over like that. But there we go. We have saved 3 kerbals, which we now get to add to our space center, which, according to the kerbal price, that's about 250,000 funds. Along, of course, with the funds that we're going to be getting for this mission. So let's recover our vessel. To fully complete those contracts, since the contract does say to bring the kerbals back to Kerbin. There we go. We got some of our parts back for a little bit of funds, and we also got all of these crew. Valentina didn't get anything, but we leveled up our engineer, and we also got Leary, Ludemi, and Megbella. All of them have advanced to level 1. Now I'm actually curious, what are these new guys? Let's see, Ludemi is an engineer. They're all engineers. Okay, so we have no lack of engineers. I would have liked a couple more, a scientist at least. At least one scientist would have been nice, I guess. Because then we could stick Bob and that scientist in a science lab at some point to do research for us. But there we go. We saved 3 Kerbals, and we get some funds and reputation for each of them. But with the safe return of those 3 new Kerbals that will be joining our program here at the Kerbal Space Center, I thank you guys all for watching. This has been episode 3 of the Mostly Stock Career series that I've been doing. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. This is PTT GRW signing out.